Originally, this bout was booked for last October, but Philipe Lins, so they say, was not cleared medically to take the fight. So Max Grishin accepts a matchup against Jailton Almeida. He's so hot right now. And ultimately, that fight falls out. So remix it and move it forward back not that long ago. Philipe Lins ends up fighting Ovince St. Preux and knocks him out in the first round, in the first minute. So ultimately, what do you get out of knocking out a former title challenger?
Nothing at all, Craig.
The guy you're supposed to fight back in October. So we do end up with this matchup at light heavyweight between the former PFL champ in Philipe Lins and a man who nearly made it to the top of the mountain with the PFL in Max Grishin. His last matchup over there was his second bout against Jordan Johnson. It ended up one of those 2-round draws. Grishin ends up into the UFC on short notice against Marcin Tybura, up a weight class, and we're off to the races. But when we look at this matchup, Matt, these two guys are so high up on experience. I mean, for Philipe Lins, he was one of the top Bellator guys not that long ago. Well, it was back in 2014. And at that time, he ended up taking on Kelly Knudsen, a guy, a 3-time All-American, Newberry College. If you saw me talking about him, I tweeted about him over the weekend because Kelly, I mean, he was supposed to fight this past weekend, and it was a 4-year return. But Kelly Knudsen's one of those guys that it was a leg injury to Philipe Lins. He also has a finish win over Volkan Oezdemir. But you look at Lins, he gets hurt in that fight. He hurts his right knee. He ends up taking a really long time off. He has to kind of build his way back up. And he gets a win here against Guilherme Viana. He ends up losing to Kleber Silva and then Vadim Nemkov. But if you watch Philipe Lins fights, even back when he was with Bellator, before that as well, into his title run with the PFL where he gets all of those wins at heavyweight and gets $1 million. When you watch a Lins fight from way back when to now, when he has the most success, he is throwing the kitchen sink at you in a straight.
That's kind of where I'll jump in if you don't mind, because we have seen different versions of a guy like Philipe Lins, and people talk about things like octagon jitters, right? And you wouldn't think a guy like Lins, who has fought in the PFL, fought in Bellator, been in fairly high-level fights in the past, would have such jitters coming into the UFC, but it did feel like he almost had a lack of confidence, because you're right, when he moves forward, when he is Bangkok ready, moving those hands, Philipe Lins is a handful to deal with.
Now, time out. Is there a lot of technique?
Yeah. Not necessarily, but he does throw big bombs, and he is a huge athlete. And that's the thing about Lins. I'm kind of more surprised out of these two guys that he is making the move down to 205, because Lins is thick, right? Like, Grishin's a tall, muscular guy, but to me, Lins got that thickness to him, so I think it might be a difficult weight cut to 205.
That's the scary part where I'm going to zig to your zag. Philipe Lins in the UFC, 0-2 at heavyweight. Philipe Lins at light heavyweight, 2-0. And he's looked physically great at 205. His first round against Marcin Prachnio, loses that, but he rallies back round 2, round 3, and then his last time out against OSP gets a first round knockout.
We were talking before we started filming, though, I'm personally trying not to kind of make that OSP knockout a big deal in my mind, because I want to look at that, I want to think of, hey, Lins is improving technically, even though he is at 37 years old, because I will say, he's got a pretty dangerous ground game to go along with those big hands that he will throw out there, so I don't think this is a fight where Grishin's going to be willing to go for a lot of those weird trip takedowns that we often see from the clinch, because if we do see Grishin go for some of those takedowns, we do see a lot of clinch between these guys, that's one of those opportunities where Lins could kind of just, you hate to say get lucky, but you know what I mean, right? Just end up in that top position, and that's where Grishin could find himself in a world of hurt, because Lins is a very heavy athlete once he does get on top, but that's the big question mark I have coming into this matchup. A, who's going to shoot for that first takedown? Because whoever gets on top is going to have a lot of success in this fight. We have seen Grishin have a good amount of success with his own takedown attempts and with his power punching with his entries for his takedown attempts, so I'll be very curious to see who goes for some of those initial wrestling exchanges, because I do think both guys can have success in that area. I just think it really comes down to where do they end up once they do end up on the mat.
And it's awkward for Philipe Lins because his teammate Andrei Arlovski's on this card, and they fought each other in the UFC, and it was Arlovski getting the win. And if you look at it for Lins, I mean, his Topology page looks like a 40-something masking as a 30-something. There's a lot of gray if you don't use that hair dye. And that's been the issue for Philipe Lins in the UFC. He just hasn't been able to have steady activity. He's been forced out of bouts, and so have his opponents. And if you look at it for Grishin, kind of the same narrative as well. I mean, Grishin comes in at heavyweight, loses to Marcin Tybura. It's a really weird run because he gets a win over Gachimrad and Tigulov, which was kind of what everybody was able to do on the way out. He has a loss to Dustin Jacoby, where a lot of folks thought that he won that one, but his last time out against William Knight. So he misses weight when he he takes on Jacoby against William Knight. William Knight showed up ready for a heavyweight fight.
He was huge.
At 218, and you had a guy in Mr. Max Grishin coming in at 206. He gets the win. He looks amazing. 30-27s across the board. But what can I tell you about the styles? Well, I kind of alluded to the fact that Philipe Lins, if he throws his hands and he gets those wide looping power shots involved in with his leg kick, he looks really good. Now, Lins will throw the occasional leg kick. He doesn't check leg kicks. Max Grishin throws one of the best leg kicks at light heavyweight.
Heavy ones.
And he kind of pitter-patters on the outside. And we've seen, and I'll throw it up there on the screen, you watch guys getting beat by Max Grishin leg kicks. I mean, it is all over. His fight against Kunchenko, the guy's writhing. People would say writhing in pain after that. But you go through and you look at Max Grishin, some of the wins, some of the losses. He hasn't been finished in years and years. And even if we talk about it, he had an M1 global title fight way back against one Kenny Garner back in 2011. He tapped due to strikes in that one as it went on. And the commentary team, which was Pat Miletich and Mauro Ranello, had no idea what was going on. Didn't think it was going to be over. But you look at the level of competition for both guys. I know it is very high.
Very good.
It's the pitter-patter leg kick out of a guy like Max Grishin, steady Eddie, and it's a lot of big actions out of a guy like Philipe Lins. And cat out of the bag, when this fight was announced back in October of last year, we both had Maximus Max Grishin in the match.
And I'm having a really hard time with it right now, too. And of course, we normally talk about the odds at the end of it. They are very close, and there's no reason why they wouldn't be, because both these guys are in a very similar position. Kind of tweeners, right? Like, you're big for light heavyweight, you're small for heavyweight, you're just trying to do what you can do. And that's why this is such an important fight, because for Lins, he is on a bit of a heater, right? Like, I never thought we were going to say that after his first few fights in the heavyweight division, but he has definitely settled into 205. I'll be curious to see how he counters the leg kicks of Grishin, and I'm glad you bring them up, because if Lins is able to get a takedown early, maybe catching Grishin off balance and getting on top, that might cut down on the volume from some of those attacks from a guy like Grishin. And if that does happen, unless Grishin is able to hurt him with a straight shot moving back, which is a pretty difficult thing to do, I could see Lins starting to take over in some of those striking exchanges.
Yeah, Lins is one of those interesting guys. When he feints with the jab and feints the takedown, it opens up a lot of his striking. You've seen that when he was with Bellator, PFL, and in the UFC. And my favorite quotable out of the Lins fights, going back and watching it, when he took on Vadim Nemkov, Mike Goldberg said, and I quote, "Just a little touch to let your partner know you're there. Just a little touch
Sounds
to let
like
your
an 80s love song.
know you're there." Or a softcore nudie vid.
Wow,
but when you look at this one, Matt, I mean, the last time these two guys fought, 87% of the fans on Topology had Max Grishin. So I'm going to say this time around, the fans like that OSP knockout, I'm going to say over under 70% Max Grishin.
I think they'll be under, but it'll be the favorite.
And we have a look at Topology. They are close. 1,383 total votes, 59% Grishin, 75% by knockout. For the 41% that have Lins, 53% by knockout, 38% by decision. If Grishin decides that he wants to try and wrestle, which he's implemented some of the earlier rounds in his recent fights, I mean, he is a master of sport and Army hand-to-hand combat. You look at Grishin, you could get caught in one of those guillotines like you saw Lins able to do against Vienna, that he was able to do it up against when he was competing with the PFL. So for me, I guess it was Caio Alencar, not Vienna. But when you look at this overall, I mean, I still have Max Grishin in the matchup, but Philipe Lins, he's a live guy out there.
I would say I agree with where the Topology votes are. Like 59% of myself thinks Max Grishin's going to win, but the 41% could make a pretty compelling argument for Philipe Lins. So I'll stick with the Grishin pick, but it's a very close fight.
A very close fight. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have in this light heavyweight matchup. Some big fights on this card. Main event, Kai Kara France taking on Amir Albazi. You're not going to want to miss any of it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.